First of all, this course on lived theology, as I said before, I don't feel you can understand King or his leadership without understanding the lived theology that was the basis of it all. It was about how King understood his own transformation and how he was able to develop into an extraordinary leader. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough.
I'm tired of marching.
You know, I'm a historian of leadership, and really, there's nobody that comes close.
I don't mind saying to you tonight.
I had never, when I first started working at the King Papers Project at Stanford, where I was an editor, for various reasons, I felt somewhat skeptical of King's leadership.
Tired of marching for something that should have been mine at first.
But the more I studied him, and boy, when you're a documentary editor, you know, producing volumes of someone's papers, you know, speeches and sermons and memos and letters, and, you know, you really get to know the person. And I just, you know, got more and more impressed, blown away by his leadership now that I've really studied it closely.
I'm tired of living every day under the threat of death. I have no martyr complex. I want to live as long as anybody in this building tonight, and sometimes I begin to doubt whether I'm going to make it through. I must confess I'm tired.
And what he had to deal with and all the forces arrayed against him. I mean, I don't know if there was even a president of the United States who had as many pressures arrayed against him that he had to be constantly fighting or surmounting. You really get a sense of someone who's an extraordinary leader.
We invite you to join us in this transformative journey and become a part of history. Enroll today in our masterclass program and be inspired by the enduring power of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. Simmons College of Kentucky, where history meets the future.
When I was in college, I went to hear this preacher, and he was a manuscript preacher. So he was the first person who made a profound impact on my style. He liberated me to preach, to feel like I could do this assignment that God had called me to. When I went to seminary, I was exposed to men like Dr. William Augustus Jones.
God's program is personality-centered and personality-directed. There can be no leading without a leader.
Like Dr. Gardner C. Taylor.
When the only thing you've got, maybe the only thing America has that is still independent is the black church.
Dr. Wyatt T. Walker. Well, when I heard those men preach, I had never heard language like that.
But because we are tied up in the garment of mutuality that is in the family of faith, Jesus said to his disciples, I no longer call you servants, ye are my brethren and sisters.
And I've tried to mold my ministry after them, because not only did they emphasize social justice and liberation for their people, but they also turned around and did the practical thing of developing concrete ministries in their communities that help to build up the community and bring stability to the lives of the people.
Dive into the captivating world of homiletics. Learn from preacher extraordinaire Dr. James C. Perkins, where every lesson is a stepping stone to becoming a more impactful preacher and leader. Simmons College of Kentucky, where your journey to greatness begins. Scan the QR code to learn more about what awaits you on this educational journey.
First of all, this course on lived theology, as I said before, I don't feel you can understand King or his leadership without understanding the lived theology that was the basis of it all. It was about how King understood his own transformation and how he was able to develop into an extraordinary leader. I mean, I can't emphasize that enough.
I'm tired of marching.
You know, I'm a historian of leadership, and really, there's nobody that comes close.
I don't mind saying to you tonight.
I had never, when I first started working at the King Papers Project at Stanford, where I was an editor, for various reasons, I felt somewhat skeptical of King's leadership.
Tired of marching for something that should have been mine at first.
But the more I studied him, and boy, when you're a documentary editor, you know, producing volumes of someone's papers, you know, speeches and sermons and memos and letters, and, you know, you really get to know the person. And I just, you know, got more and more impressed, blown away by his leadership now that I've really studied it closely.
I'm tired of living every day under the threat of death. I have no martyr complex. I want to live as long as anybody in this building tonight, and sometimes I begin to doubt whether I'm going to make it through. I must confess I'm tired.
And what he had to deal with and all the forces arrayed against him. I mean, I don't know if there was even a president of the United States who had as many pressures arrayed against him that he had to be constantly fighting or surmounting. You really get a sense of someone who's an extraordinary leader.
We invite you to join us in this transformative journey and become a part of history. Enroll today in our masterclass program and be inspired by the enduring power of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy. Simmons College of Kentucky, where history meets the future.
When I was in college, I went to hear this preacher, and he was a manuscript preacher. So he was the first person who made a profound impact on my style. He liberated me to preach, to feel like I could do this assignment that God had called me to. When I went to seminary, I was exposed to men like Dr. William Augustus Jones.
God's program is personality-centered and personality-directed. There can be no leading without a leader.
Like Dr. Goodner C. Taylor.
When the only thing you've got, maybe the only thing America has that is still independent is the black church.
Dr. Wyatt T. Walker. Well, when I heard those men preach, I had never heard language like that.
But because we are tied up in the garment of mutuality that is in the family of faith, Jesus said to his disciples, I no longer call you servants, ye are my brethren and sisters.
And I've tried to mold my ministry after them, because not only did they emphasize social justice and liberation for their people, but they also turned around and did the practical thing of developing concrete ministries in their communities that help to build up the community and bring stability to the lives of the people.
Dive into the captivating world of homiletics. Learn from preacher extraordinaire Dr. James C. Perkins, where every lesson is a stepping stone to becoming a more impactful preacher and leader. Simmons College of Kentucky, where your journey to greatness begins. Scan the QR code to learn more about what awaits you on this educational journey.
When I was in college, I went to hear this preacher, and he was a manuscript preacher. So he was the first person who made a profound impact on my style. He liberated me to preach, to feel like I could do this assignment that God had called me to. When I went to seminary, I was exposed to men like Dr. William Augustus Jones.
God's program is personality-centered and personality-directed. There can be no leading without a leader.
Like Dr. Gardner C. Taylor.
When the only thing you've got, maybe the only thing America has that is still independent is the black church.
Dr. Wyatt T. Walker. Well, when I heard those men preach, I had never heard language like that.
But because we are tied up in the garment of mutuality that is in the family of faith, Jesus said to his disciples, I no longer call you servants, ye are my brethren and sisters.
And I've tried to mold my ministry after them, because not only did they emphasize social justice and liberation for their people, but they also turned around and did the practical thing of developing concrete ministries in their communities that help to build up the community and bring stability to the lives of the people.
Dive into the captivating world of homiletics. Learn from preacher extraordinaire Dr. James C. Perkins, where every lesson is a stepping stone to becoming a more impactful preacher and leader. Simmons College of Kentucky, where your journey to greatness begins. Scan the QR code to learn more about what awaits you on this educational journey.
Well, I guess it's still morning, so good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to the West Louisville Forum Solutions for Urban America, an initiative brought to you by Simmons College of Kentucky, Louisville's only HBCU. Simmons faculty and staff, can y'all make some noise here? That's what I like to hear. And it's also brought to you by the Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Senior Center for Racial Justice. Well, Happy New Year, everybody. All right. Dr. Cosby launched, he said a phrase a couple of months ago, and it's really stuck with me. And I know that that's going to be the mantra for Simmons College as well. And it's achieving more in 24. And Simmons is off to a running start. New courses being offered, new professors being brought to the campus. So Simmons, you can give yourselves a hand. So many wonderful things going on here at this wonderful institution. This is the first forum of 2024, and we're going to be talking a bit about white Christian nationalism, and it's actually a phase that many of us are beginning to hear more about, and our special guest is going to be delving into this topic. So let me introduce our special guest today. Our special guest is Michael O. Emerson, PhD, and he is a Chavant Fellow in Religion and Public Policy at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy, and he's also the author of 15 books. From what I'm understanding, he had a book called Divided by Faith, which really propelled him to the national level, and he really dissects the religion of whiteness. And you know the popular phrasing where Sunday morning is the most segregated day of the week. He actually did research on that, so I'm excited to hear some of that research coming up today. He has more than 20 years of working and engaging with the community. And he is in Houston, Texas, and I have to say this, he's a Bears fan as well. And so everyone, let's put our hands together and do a warm welcome for Dr. Michael Emerson, and then we're going to have an opportunity to have a Q&A session after his presentation. Let me give you your mic.
Good morning. It's early, isn't it? Still morning. It's unusual to be speaking in the morning and have people come out, but I sure appreciate it. So you can see what the title of the talk is: White Christian Nationalism, Roadblock to Racial Justice, and Strategies to Counter It. We'll talk a little bit about that, and then when we have question and answer, we can talk more. So what is white Christian nationalism? I don't want to go too much into it, but I want to make sure that we understand just what I'm referring to when I talk about it. So a political ideology, right? It's political from the get-go, but it's also a cultural framework, a way of understanding how the world should be. And what it does is advocate a fusion of symbols of Christianity with American civic life, that they should be one and the same. And it includes some interesting and unfortunate things, right? Nativism, white supremacy, divine sanction for authoritarian control, militarism, and a very limited definition of what national identity is. So I like to say it this way: it isn't patriotism, which is loyalty to a constitution or your nation as a whole, but it is partisanship, loyalty to a limited group. Now, we took about 3 to 4 years and did the largest study of race and religion in the U.S. Just completed that. So let me just quickly tell you what that is, because the data I'm going to show you, the graphs and things, come from this study. So when we got a grant from the Lilly Endowment to do this study, we first formed what we call a collaboration team. These are practitioners, these are pastors, these are academics that work in the area of race and religion. And that team was 300 people. And we began our study by interviewing and filming many of these 300 people to get a sense of where are we at. Basically, we'd ask one question: what is the state of race in the church today? And because these were focus groups, and these are pastors and academics, they talk for hours on one question. So there we go. From that, we used what they had to say, analyzed what they had to say, and created a national survey, which was for adult Americans. Surveyed thousands of Americans On this survey, the collaboration team helped us design the survey, make sure we got the wording right. From that study, we then did follow-ups where we went and interviewed in more detail a lot of these people, because as we analyzed the data, we had further questions. So we did that. We studied multiple churches, and we ended up doing yet another round of surveys to see if we'd see the same thing over time. Okay, so what did we find? First of all, let's point this out, that racism and racial injustice don't go away. Sometimes it seems like it's going away, and then boom, it comes back. So why is that? And I'm going to give you what our answer is, then we're going to back up and look at the data to see how we got to that answer. Racism and racial injustice will not go away because they're a life-giving force of an alternative religion, a major sect within Christianity. This life-giving force, meaning it is the food that feeds this religion. It has to have racial injustice. So we ultimately conclude this, that in the United States at least, race itself has become religionized. We know that religion is racialized, right? We have white churches, black churches, Hispanic churches, and so on. But race has moved from the level of kind of a human creation to the cosmic. It has become religionized. And what it does, of course, is cause deep, deep damage and trauma. Okay, so let's look at some data. I think this is the more interesting stuff. I should make sure I advance here. Sorry. I forgot to do this. All right. So late summer of 2019, we did our first round of surveys, and we asked one of these questions. The United States has a race problem, and we're asking people, do you agree or disagree that the United States currently has a race problem? We're going to use these terms: practicing white Christians, practicing black Christians. Practicing Christians is defined this way. 3 things. 1, you say you're a Christian. 2, that you say your faith is very or extremely important to you. And 3, that you attend a worship service at least once a month. So that's what we call a practicing Christian. We used to divide like Catholic, mainline, evangelical, but that no longer seems to matter. What matters is, are they a practicing Christian or not? So you can see here, there's a big difference, right, between white and black Christians in 2019 on whether they think there's a race problem. 38% of white Christians said there's a race problem, 78% of black Christians. If you remember then in 2020, George Floyd, series of marches, protests, flames, television, social media, everything was about race for months. So we thought, we've got to ask this question again. So a year later, late summer of 2020, we asked. Now we made a prediction of what we'll find, and I'll come back to that, but here's what we found. With all of that in the news, less practicing white Christians now said there was a race problem. Went from 38% to 30%. Whereas for black Christians, from 78% to 87%. Okay, let's show you that. All right, so you can see what we had was this huge 40% gap, went to 57% in just 1 year. We'll come back to why this is actually what we predicted, why this happens. Okay, we asked a series of questions about biblical texts to see how people would interpret them. But to get to those biblical texts, you had to answer this question first. Should the Bible be used to determine what is right or wrong? If they said yes, always, then they're going to get the series of next questions. So this is how they worked. They would see, because they're doing this online, in the system of laws that God gave the Israelites to follow, there were laws that protected foreigners from being treated unjustly. We cite the verse, it's hyperlinked, so if they want to go and read it in different translations, they can do that. And then we basically restate what it says and ask if they agree. Therefore, it is good to have laws that protect foreigners from being treated unjustly. Do you strongly agree? And so on. So that's one. We asked 4 questions. In the Bible, the prophet Nehemiah confessed sins committed by himself, his nation, and his ancestors. All right. Therefore, it is good to confess sins committed by me, my nation, and my ancestors. The first Christians listened to the complaints of an ethnic minority group that was being treated unjustly and empowered leaders within that minority group to correct the injustice. It's a brilliant demonstration of leadership in a diverse setting. Acts 6, 1 through 7. Therefore, it's good to do that. And then finally, in the Bible, the Apostle Paul taught that people should not use unwholesome words. Joel Goza. Ephesians 4:29. Therefore, it is bad to use unwholesome words. All right, so notice here, the first three questions that we ask, or statements, and ask their level of agreement, they're about benefits for other groups, or they're about confessing the sins of your own group, right? And the fourth question is what we call a control, because it has nothing to do with other groups. It's just individual piety or individual action that I personally do not swear. All right, so what did we find here? So first of all, in that control question, there was no difference across racial group, white, black, Asian, Hispanic, Native American. In this case, not enough Asian and Native responses to reliably, but the patterns were the same. No difference. So the majority of all practicing Christians said, not good to use unwholesome words. How about those first three? For the first three questions, the majority of African American and Hispanics strongly agreed that's what the Bible says. But for white folks, white practicing Christians, only about a third, all of whom had said you should always use the Bible to determine right or wrong, agreed that that's what the Bible says. Okay? So it's an interesting pattern. Again, it's what we thought we might find, but we did find it. Another question. The U.S. has been oppressive to minorities. And again, this is only, again, of practicing Christians. 75% of practicing African American Christians agree. Over 60% of Hispanics agree, so the majorities. But less than 40% of practicing white Christians agree. And by the way, I should note, we don't find these differences for non-practicing Christians or non-Christians. These differences by race are only with practicing Christians. Do racial minorities use racism as an excuse for economic inequalities? The majority of all groups disagree, except one, and you can probably guess, white practicing Christians. Over 70% agree that that is the case, that racial minorities are making excuses for their economic inequality. Should people from minority groups work their way up without any special favors? The majority of all groups of color disagree, whether Christian or not. A half of non-Christian whites agree, half disagree, but over 2/3 of white practicing Christians agree. Only one Christian group, make sure I get here. Okay. Only one Christian group does not believe that race relations can be improved by teaching about race in the church. White practicing Christians, 2/3 believe that would not be the answer. For every other group, Christian or not, they thought that would be a very good thing. So you might ask, well, what do they think would be the answer? For only this group, white practicing Christian, the answer is to convert people to Christianity. Yeah. Okay. Unlike any other group where there are no differences, white practicing Christians are twice as likely as other whites to say that being white is extremely important to how they think about themselves. Twice as likely to say that they often feel the need to defend their racial group, and twice as likely to agree that it is more acceptable for whites to have more wealth than others. Imagine that. They're twice as likely to say it's perfectly within God's design that white folks have more money and more wealth than others. We didn't want to just get attitudes, but also feelings. How do people feel about race? And so one of the ways that we did that is we gave them just kind of 5 little short phrases and asked them how they felt about it, what feelings came to mind. So you can see, you can have positive or negative feelings about them. So one example would be white privilege. What did they feel about that? White practicing Christians had more positive emotions about this than any other group. The other ones we asked, black power, social justice, undocumented immigrants, and reparation. How did they feel about that? White practicing Christians expressed more negative emotions than any other group. And the most common for all of these negative emotion was anger. That's what they would say. Now, we listed like 15 different emotions, and they could select 3. But if there's something they wanted to say or write that wasn't there, they could enter it. So these are just a few. Even though they could circle angry, a lot of times they would again write angry with exclamation point, disgusted, it's idiotic, aggravated, irritated, send them back. The one I always thought interesting is that they had previously told us don't use unwholesome words, and then they would use unwholesome words. Yeah. All right. So what is going on? Why this? What we write about in a forthcoming book is the religion of whiteness. It's a distortion of historical Christianity, right? Could even argue it's not Christianity, but my editor wouldn't let me argue that, so I have to say it's a distortion. Interesting, yeah. We call it the religion of whiteness. So what is this thing? This thing that has woven its way into a lot of white Christianity. And I'll be able to tell you exactly how many people it's woven its way into, because we kept finding the same thing over and over in the data. 2/3 of all white practicing Christians empirically subscribe to this religion, subscribe to Christianity, and subscribe to the religion of whiteness. 2/3. The good news is 1/3 do not, but the bad news is, obviously, the majority do. Okay, so what is this thing we're calling the religion of whiteness? It's interesting, W.E.B. Du Bois in the 1920s actually talked about the religion of whiteness washing up on the shores of the United States. He didn't really define what it was, but he had the term. So we define it as a unified system of beliefs and practices that venerates and sacralizes, worships, whiteness, while declaring profane anything not associated with whiteness. So it's by default, if it's not whiteness, it's bad and needs to be resisted. It's a disfiguring of historical Christianity. It'd help if you could see these. So much that it can be viewed as a competing religion. It's akin, in Old Testament, to simultaneously worshiping both the God of the Hebrews and foreign gods. This dual worship has become so common, its precepts so accepted, that in many white churches, it's simply seen as part of Christianity. So, religion itself always has these components. Sacred symbols. Usually you're worshiping an unseen, so you do that by creating the seen, your sacred symbols. And then you have beliefs around those, you have practices, and then you have social organization. Might be churches, parachurches, other things. So the religion of whiteness has sacred symbols itself, and that is white Jesus. Jesus must be white. We'll come to see why in a moment. A merging of the cross and the flag, which is that Christian nationalism, and increasingly firearms to demonstrate the power behind it. So when we type in Google search, just put Jesus, this is what you get. And this is who Jesus is. Jesus is even a little baby playing Jesus, right? But he's always white. We had to go down hundreds and hundreds of photos to find a non-white Jesus. Who is Jesus not? This is not Jesus, none of these. Not in this religion of whiteness. This is sacrilege, this is silliness to the folks in religion of whiteness, it's heresy. This is just not Jesus. Also the symbol of the cross and the flag basically becoming one. Lots of churches will fly the American flag right next to the cross until, as in my father-in-law's front yard, they're the same thing. And then firearms. There's Jesus nestling a M16. Yeah. And then you see a lot of shirts sold like this. Family, faith, friends, flags, firearms, 5 things you don't mess with. They kind of start merging together. Until they do merge. Like Jesus is America, America is Jesus, Jesus is white, America then is white, faith is white. You see how they all become one and the same. And Jesus even is with Donald Trump when he is being unfairly treated in the courts. Okay, so if all religions have beliefs and practices, let me just quickly point out those beliefs and practices. So in this religion, 6 beliefs are central. We test all of these, we find support for all of them. One is a commitment to whiteness, that whiteness is superior. It's the benefits and the power that come from being white that is, in a sense, worshipped. It's a blessing from God that's given. Second is that God is on the side of the dominant group. So the Bible in this religion teaches that God is with the dominant, the winners. And he is that because that's the reason you're winning. It's because God is pleased with you and blessing you. You could call that the gospel of health and wealth, but that's what it means right there. Very important that whiteness is universal. So whiteness is normative, it's unseen. Jesus is for everybody. Jesus is white. That's already been established. Therefore, the universal is white, and the white is universal. Everything else is a shadow of what this is the real truth. So it centers white understandings then, theology, values, and actions. But, of course, because it's already created whiteness as universal, it will never say that it is establishing a white theology. It's establishing theology. Everybody else can have their own ethnic theologies. There's black theology, black power, whatever, but those aren't the real theology. Okay? So that's the trick. When you can make whiteness universal, then you become the standard in everything. And of course, white Christian nationalism, which we've already talked about, and then the doctrine of non-white inferiority, the assumed otherness of everybody else because they are not white. So 5 practices here. Highly selective use of Christian biblical scriptures. I showed you the example that I started with in how the Bible is interpreted. Epistemology of ignorance, a fancy term to say that it is quite effective to not know things. This really came to me. My co-author, African-American, he's a professor at Villanova, Glenn Bracey. He said, isn't it odd that for white children, we're 400 years into this American experiment, and they come to college, and it's as if they've never heard about the problems of race. They don't understand. How is it possible that you could not know this after hundreds and hundreds of years of it? This is the practice of ignorance. First of all, you can do it through segregation, so you're not exposed to it. But second of all, you just don't know. And by not knowing, you don't have to deal with it. So when I showed you the data of, is there a race problem? Because we believed in this epistemology of ignorance, that's why we predicted that when the pressure is really on and race is right there at the forefront, less white folks will say there is a race problem. And that's exactly what happened. It's a strategy for maintaining position. Third is a veneration of sacred symbols, which we have talked about. Fourth is to actively protect whiteness. And I will talk about that just briefly in a moment. Whenever it's threatened, there will be a set of things that happen, and you can predict what will happen, and they will happen. One of which is there will be ignorance. And then fifth, opposing Christians of color and other whites who do not subscribe to the religion of whiteness. Your faith will be questioned. Your beliefs and practices will be marginalized. You will be belittled. You will be called unchristian, a heretic, enemy of God. You'll get some label. You're woke. You're whatever. You're a communist. The term varies over time, but there'll be a term found for you. So these defense strategies that I mentioned, it's kind of by a playbook. You'll identify the offenders, anybody that's threatening the religion of whiteness. Then you build a defense based on religion, usually accusing people of being non-biblical. A white preacher that preaches on race will have white folks come up almost always to tell them, stick to the Bible, right? 3, you simplify the defense. So the enemy is stated clearly. It's CRT, critical race theory. It's wokeness. It's something. So you can boil down all the complexity into a word or a phrase, and then you label a person, right? So that the attack then happens, and you put the offender on defensive. I'm not woke, or whatever you have to try to do. Ultimately, you're accused of not being American, not being Christian. So how does this happen? And we got this from interviewing people, found these same ones over and over. One is spiritualizing. So you're told, don't address race, God will solve it. That's God's bigger issue than humans. You think you're all that, and you're not. Leave it alone. Don't touch it. Let God do what he wants to do. Second is to stick to the gospel. A lot of times people describe to us where an older white Christian would take them to the side, put their arm around them, and say, I'm all for, addressing racism, and we need to do something about that, but we really got to just stick to the gospel right now. Leave that political stuff for the non-churched. Okay, and then go along with that is the paternalism. I'll pull you aside. I'm really concerned. I see your passion. I love what you're doing, but I just got to tell you as your friend, you don't want to be doing this. You're going to get ostracized. You're going to get rejected. So I'm just letting you know that because I care for you. Weaponize the scripture. This is used a lot. Quoting certain scriptures on not being divisive or avoiding worldly concerns. Infer motives. So people that are trying to address racism will be said that they have a spirit of rebellion or they're preaching hate. They're too busy just wanting attention for themselves. I remember interviewing 20 years ago, and Jesse Jackson was in the news a lot, and so many white Christians would tell me that Jesse Jackson does what he does because he just wants attention. That's the only reason. Label and insult. So ultimately, you're woke, delirious, you're a Marxist, you're satanic, you're a Jezebel, you're a Nazi, you're a Judas. And then if none of that works, then you'll be shunned. You're simply cut off from the church, from the family, from the religion. So notice that what these have in common is they're all gaslighting the person or the group, decentering the actual issue, putting you again on the defensive, making you question your own motives. That's what happens. Now, we did some really fancy statistical procedures, and we found really clear findings. Rowers, religion of whiteness. Turns out they're not all the same. There's 2 groups. 2 very clear and different groups that fit together like a perfect jigsaw puzzle. They need each other, and together they effectively defend the religion. So let me tell you about these 2 groups. One we call the white veil group, and this is 75% of all the religion of whiteness followers. Okay, so they present themselves as not seeing whiteness, not seeing white. They're just people. There's no race. It's sort of like there's a veil over their eyes, right? And they have this mantra. There is no whiteness. There is no white privilege. There are just people. And it's said sometimes directly, other times it's inferred. There is no whiteness. There is no white privilege. There are just people. So the work, of course, of this group is just to make the whole thing illusory. It's not there. You think you see it. It's not there. And we're telling you it's not there. We'll pull you aside and tell you it's not there, whatever. But it's very effective because people spend then so much time just trying to prove it exists that they can't actually do anything about it. Now, the second group is at 25%. And interestingly enough, this group is at least 10 years younger on average than the white veil group. They are the foot soldiers of this religion. They see whiteness everywhere. When we ask questions about it, the majority of them say they have to defend their race, that they they have to fight for the race, that it's okay to have more wealth than other groups. They see themselves as continually victims in the system. So that's why they have to defend whiteness itself. So when there's a real strong push in the nation or locally, the white might group will rise up and do their defending. Okay. Wrapping up. What does God call us to do in such a context then? How would we work for racial justice in this? I mean, this thing is massive. So I'm just going to give a quick example here. So we all got our GPSs because we all have phones, I imagine. And in the old days, right, we had to get out maps and everything. My kids asked me how we used to get places. But the beauty of this is, let's say that it says to go 8 blocks north and then turn left. And so instead, for whatever reason, I go 6 blocks south and turn right. It doesn't then say, you idiot, I cut you off. Okay, it did that to me one time. I lived part-time in northern Minnesota, and I drove out onto a lake because it was winter, and going to a ice house. Believe it or not, lakes there, they like plow roads and put up signs. And it didn't know what to do, and after a while, it just stopped talking and figured I was dead, I guess, because I was in a lake. So, yeah, you can silence it. But mostly we know what it says. It just says recalculating. And then because it knows the destination, and there's always a path to get there. That's what I want to suggest for us. We're totally off the path, but we still have the same destination. So we need to recalculate. How might we do that? I want to suggest 4 priorities. First of all, we got to make clear the destination. That's the beauty of why GPS works. It knows where we are, it knows where we're trying to get to. So what is the Christian life? What is Christian community? The beloved community. Where are we trying to get to? We're going to have to address betrayal trauma. This is what we call when people and institutions, when people are betrayed by things that they're depending on and trusting. You're trusting that Christians are your family, and then a certain group of Christians are rejecting you. It's a deep, deep kind of betrayal. We'll obviously then have to map a new path. And to do that, we're going to have to root out the religion of whiteness. Some people are sold out to the religion of whiteness. Some people are in it and don't know they're in it. That's fine. Those who want to stay in it, they can stay in it. But we've got to move away from and separate that religion from being interwoven with Christianity. It has nothing to do with Christianity. It doesn't belong there. And then finally, we have to do this through coordinated ministry. The problem with Christianity so often is that we do it in silos, and that's exactly what works for the religion of whiteness. If we do it racially separate, if we do it denominationally separate, then it wins. So the question is, do we want justice, which is the biblical call, or, let me go back here, just us, which is the temptation for everyone? I gave a talk a year ago, and a man named Jim Bear Jacobs. He's a member of the Mohican Nation, and he's director of the racial justice for the Minnesota Council of Churches. After having basically a day together talking, he said something that I thought was really profound, so I just want to share it. He said, if the white church is a source of so much pain and hurt to the rest of the Christian family, if the very concept white church is wrong, do we need a death and a resurrection? And then he asked, what would that resurrection look like? A recreating of what church is. So I'll conclude with this, that ultimately the current dominant story is a false narrative, and it's destructive. So we're going to need a new story. Stories are powerful. This is how Jesus taught, and we have a false story. So what is a new story? It needs to be told by what I call the trampled people, the people of God. And something, like here's one example, right? Children of God, let us trust that there is enough for all. We are not in competition. That's the devil's lie. God's economy multiplies loaves and fishes for all his children. So many of Christians don't believe that, believe we're in competition. And the religion of whiteness definitely is structured on competition, and only one group can win, and it will make sure it's the group that wins. So I will stop there, and I think we're going to do some question and answers. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Emerson. Such an interesting conversation. All right, calling to the stage, we've got some students that are going to help out, Alana Young and Tara Bobo. All right. Okay. Oh, Asani, sorry, Asani. All right, real quick before we get into the conversation, well, anyone have a question, go ahead and flag down one of the students, and while we're getting that question, a little bit of your background, that you actually did research about Sunday morning being the most segregated day of the week. Why does that still stand, though?
Yeah, so we've been tracking where people go to church since 1998, and we define a mixed church, racially mixed church, where no one group is more than 80%. So the vast majority of churches still are basically one group, or majority, 80% or more one group, right? Why that matters so much is because that allows the religion of whiteness to thrive. So in white churches, there's nobody there to say, hey, that doesn't seem like Christianity to me. It's just an echo chamber, right? Just like we find in our social media and so on. So that's the real destructive part of it.
Wow, interesting information. We have a question over here.
Yes, how you doing? This is Dr. Kamari Douglas, Department of Sociology at Simmons College of Kentucky. The question that I had for you was kind of more so structured around how you conducted the research. I know you stated that the survey was given out online. What was the prompt individuals were shown before? Or what did they think that they were actually filling out? Like, how were you able to get those starch, candid answers from individuals?
Yeah, great question. So you say, we were going to do a survey on race and religion. No, we didn't say that. First of all, they got paid for their time, so that helped. But second, that they were told that we were assessing state of American life, which we were, but specific areas. But we had many questions that had nothing to do with race and religion. One, because we were interested, and two, we needed those as variables to understand the relationships between race and religion. So yeah, that was the prompt that was used. Thanks for that question. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? Got one right there in the back.
Okay. Yes. So can you say exactly when Roe began, what decade, and how it's been propagated through politics?
Yeah, so, and I'm using the work of Joel Goza here, but it actually began in England and over in Europe. So it's been there for a long time, and it's grown and took really strong hold in the U.S., and it is increasingly over time. So like I said, W.E.B. Du Bois identified it 100 years ago. It was there before then. Because by the time Christianity came to the U.S., right, it was already, we're enslaving people, we're okay with hundreds of thousands of Native Americans dying. So there it is. But I think where you see it really grow in strength is when you have like the moral majority in the late 70s, early 80s, when the idea is that white Christians can go into politics and should go into politics and make change and see their values expressed nationally. So then it becomes very, very strong.
All right. Any other questions? All right. We got a question right here in the back.
Hello. To go along with the question about how the survey data was collected and about the representation of national views, was there a generational difference in views amongst Christians within the white community? Practicing Christians, as they were called in the study, and do you think that the views would change based on having a clear definition of what was being taken into account?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I can't see which section you're in. So I won't look.
She's
Which?
right over
Right
here.
here. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, nice to see you again. So as I mentioned, within the religion of whiteness, the white might group, the foot soldiers, are younger, which surprised me, a full 10 years younger on average. So if you're in the religion of whiteness, the more militant are the younger folks. But if you look at the 1/3 who are not, if we're looking just at white folks, they tend to be younger than the white veil, but not as young as the white might. So it's a weird shape of who's doing what. Not a lot of difference, some difference for other racial groups, but very few are practicing the religion of whiteness, though interestingly, some non-whites do subscribe to the religion of whiteness because it can give them benefits too. And so my co-author is actually writing a book on that. I can't wait to read it, but yeah.
Interesting thing you said, though. You said racism and racial justice will not go away. And I know a lot of us had the hope and anticipation that it would be something that we would grow out of as a culture as the years go on that would dissipate. But what is the purpose of hosting these conversations if it's something that's never going to go away? Why is it important for us to have these discussions?
Yeah. I don't want to be what they call an Afro-pessimist, that it can't. But it won't go away as long as we allow this religion of whiteness to thrive. So I think that what happens in the national scene is that we see racism as a secular problem. It's about economics. It's about identity and respect. And what we're trying to say is, no, it is much, much deeper and much, much higher than that. And if you don't acknowledge that it is a spiritual issue, that this is why we say race has become religionized. It is a religion, and people will die for their religion. If we don't acknowledge that, we will never overcome. That's why what we're saying is that the thing that we have to address to overcome racial injustice is this religion of whiteness. Short of that, it will be here.
Wow. And it was interesting, the pictures of the white Jesus, because I know many of us can remember our grandmamas or somebody in our family having white Jesus plastered in the wall, didn't even realize what we were doing at the time. Do we have any other questions? All right, there in the back.
Yes, I was wondering, two questions. What have been some of the reactions to predominantly white audiences that you've given this presentation to? And then the other thing was, have you seen a rejection of black young people to the church because of this information?
Oh, those are good questions. Thank you. Okay, so when I speak to all white audiences, which is rare because of what I have to say, I think, yeah, it doesn't go real well. I'll give you an example. I got invited to be like this featured speaker at the University of Villanova, and packed house, but mostly white students. By the time I was done, it was half full, and it was majority people of color. That most of the white students just got up and left. They weren't going to hear it, right? I'm going to be this epistemology of ignorance. I'm not going to listen. I'm not going to deal with it. You're wrong, and I'm done with it. So I think that's kind of a common thing. And then some of the things I said will happen to me, like I'll get accused of being self-righteous or being a Marxist or something like that. So that's what happens there. Yes, people of color, especially African Americans, leaving the church, which is such a huge issue. What to say there? Yeah, when we ask why, that's what they'll say, even though I don't think it's true, but that the church isn't strong enough into justice issues and maybe is too complacent to the religion of whiteness, too deferential to it, and they find that very offensive.
Interesting point, though. I understand that Black Lives Matter was the first major civil rights organization that was created not in the church since the civil rights movement in the 60s. And so that conversation amongst young people that felt as if the church wasn't doing enough to combat racial justice during that time.
Yeah.
Interesting conversation. We have a question back there?
Yes, I'm United Methodist. The United Methodist Church, huge split, not race, LGBTQ conferences are leaving in droves. You want to address that?
It's so interesting because this does come up a lot, and I appreciate the question. I'm still trying to figure out what to do with that because that is dividing people. And a lot of times white younger folks who are very much into justice will reject churches themselves, especially, like, they put LGBT things ahead of racial justice in the end, because they will reject, if you don't subscribe to their view, then they will reject you. Doesn't matter what else you believe. I think that's, so I'm not going to say anything in general. I just say we can't be one item on, we used to say you can't be one item voters. You can't be one item justice people either. I mean, there are many issues. So we may not agree on that issue, but that doesn't mean we can't work together on racial justice issues. I would say, as someone who believes there is a devil, that it's a wonderful tactic to keep dividing us to addressing racial justice.
All right. We have someone, Miss Lindsay Sheldon, who's going to come up and share with us a little bit of information. If we have enough time, we'll get to the question. I can see a hand back there in the back, but we've got to keep moving. Miss Lindsay Sheldon, and she's a coordinating team member with the Louisville Showing Up for Racial Justice, also known as LSURJ. Is Lindsay here? Okay. You give her the mic?
I just didn't. Somehow we got notice that this was at noon.
Oh, no. Okay.
And then this morning at 10:30, we got notice that it was at 11. So Lindsay is not here? Or
well, can you tell us a little bit about the organization?
Knowing that I just started with Court Watch a few months ago, but SURJ is. Oh, yes, I was hoping. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
We are so excited to be here, and I so appreciate your presentation. And I'm sorry that I thought this was at 12 and didn't hear it from the beginning. LSURJ is Louisville Showing Up for Racial Justice, and it has been active more than 10 years, because I've been active in it for 10 years. And the premise of LSURJ is that that white people have to show up to fight racial injustice, and that we do that through work with our accountability partners. Too often, white people jump in and think we can fix it, and that's from our white perspective. And so, our role is to find out what people of color think needs to be done, how it needs to be done, and how can we as white people support that. And I think, it is true that white people often are the ones who have the political influence and perhaps the financial resources. And so if we as white people can use that in support of racial justice, that's critical. And so that's how we want to show up. And, to another point, in many different justice issues, but particularly we started it with racial injustices. So thank you for, if you have a question, I'll answer your question.
No, we just want to thank you and your organization. Can we show them some love? We appreciate all the allies that definitely come together for this work. Thank you so much. I'm going to let that person that had a question right there in the back get their question in, and then we're going to move along. I'm going to give you the last word.
Good afternoon, and thank you for your presentation. My question has to do with what you shared at the very end of your presentation, that there has to be a death and a resurrection. what do you propose, or how do you propose that the death come about? Because the death has to come before resurrection.
Yeah, thank you. That's a difficult question. So I will give you my response at this point. And that is two things. A lot of times if I talk like with white students, they'll want to do something and they'll say like, how can I diversify my church? And I'll say that's the wrong question. The right question is, where can you go to church to help diversify? So you need to go and be under people of color. You need to go and be the one who's uncomfortable. You need to be the one who actually moves. So that's one way. If you're committed to this, switching churches, I know that could be difficult. I've done it myself. The second is, and I'm going to recommend one book. It's called Rediscipling the White Church. That book says, here are 7 things. If you're, like, say you're in an all-white community, there's nothing much you can do to, there's very little racial diversity. So then what? It gives you how to basically die as the church you understand it and resurrect with 7 new practices and principles.
All right. I want to thank everybody for participating with the questions. And students, we thank you so much. Dr. Emerson, going to give you any words to kind of tie up your presentation and what you've presented with us today.
Yeah, I don't want to leave you feeling like this is so heavy. It is heavy, but it is addressable. And I just want to emphasize, there are allies, 1/3 of white folks who are wanting to see change. We saw someone stand up and speak on that already. So we're trying to find each other to work on these issues, and these issues can be addressed, but they're not just addressed, and I want to leave you with this. Politically, I think that matters tremendously, but they're addressed in the church. That's where the problem has itself been rooted.
All right, and we want to remind them that that they can get a copy of your book and learn more about your work, and you can go ahead and scan that QR code right there at the top to get your hands on one of his books, The Religion of Whiteness, and your social media handles. You want to go ahead and toss that out in case people are interested in following you?
I only have LinkedIn, so
Okay.
if you just search my name on LinkedIn. I somehow got excluded from Facebook. I can't get back in. So.
Uh-oh. Well, we thank you so much for that. Real quick, I want to let you guys know about an event coming up that we want you to mark your calendars and definitely come out and join us. And it is, we are going to have a discussion on a documentary, and it's called Stamped from the Beginning, if you check out that graphic there. It's a definitive history of racist ideas in America, and it's going to be followed up with a panel discussion that's going to take place on January 16th. The showing of the documentary will be at 5 p.m. and the panel discussion will be at 6:30. It's going to be powerful. So we got some heavyweights there on the ticket. We've got Dr. Ricky Jones. We've got Dr. Stuart Burns, Dr. Jamar Tisby, and Dr. Erica Whitaker. So please go ahead and put that on your calendar and be sure to join us. Also, we have got some tickets. St. Stephen Church is going to be collaborating once again with the Louisville Orchestra. To God be the glory. The last time we did that, a pandemic happened. It was so powerful. A pandemic happened right after that. So this is the return of it. It's going to be a wonderful event. Saturday, it's going to be held at the Kentucky Center for the Arts, and on Sunday, it's going to be held here at St. Stephen Church. The event on Sunday is absolutely free, but on Saturday, you need a ticket. And Miss Angela Lucier, when you raise your hand in the air, if you want a ticket for that event, Angela can get you hooked up with a ticket. But we hope if you come out and support this event either Saturday or Sunday, this is going to be a wonderful, beautiful night of collaboration and music. Going to give the last word to our pastor, Dr. Cosby. Can we show some love for our president?
Thank you so much. Wow, thank you so much. His book, Divided by Faith, I cannot stress that is a must read. I know it will probably be a primer for the religion of whiteness, and it is so relevant. And I just took some notes. First of all, I want to thank you for coming out. Give yourselves a hand. And how many have heard of Derek Bell? Who is Derek Bell? author. He is the father of critical race theory. And this is his basic thesis. It's just what Dr. Emerson said. He said, and this is foundational to critical race theory, racism in the United States is permanent. That was his opening statement. He said there will be peaks of progress. So, for example, after George Floyd, there was a peak of progress where on the New York Times bestseller list, there were books about racial justice that everyone was purchasing. But he said the peaks of progress will eventually return to white supremacy. And he said that's the pattern of history, that you'll see a peak of progress and then it will revert back. You'll see an Obama, whoa, here comes Trump. You will see a civil rights movement and then, whoa, we're getting there. Here comes Nixon. And he said that is the pattern of history. But what he did not say was that while racism is permanent, here's the good news, so is resistance. So there has always been a resistance movement. Historically, the black church has been at the forefront of resistance along with white allies. During Black History Month, I'm going to preach a series of sermons for the whole month entitled, listen to this, White Folk, Black Folk Need to Know. Like Ann Braden, like Charles Sumner, like John Brown and Thaddeus Stevens, and Viola Liuzzo, a white woman from Detroit, like Goodman and Goodman Swarner, along with a black man named Cheney, who in '64, and this is what, the 60th anniversary of the Freedom Summer that took place in Mississippi, that really helped give birth the following year to the Voting Rights Bill of '65. There are two kinds of ignorance, and he mentioned that. One is woeful ignorance, where you just don't know. That's ignorance of the head. It's woeful, but it's head ignorance. Whoever said what we don't know won't hurt us. What you don't know will hurt you. There's woeful ignorance, which is in the head. But what we're dealing with is not woeful ignorance. It's willful ignorance. And the only thing that can change willful ignorance is the conversion of the heart. That's why this is, Dr. Emerson said, is such a spiritual matter. One last thing I want to say. Bill Jones, how have you heard of William Augustus Jones? He's from Louisville. He was the pastor of Bethany Baptist Church in New York, deceased. Mentor of Al Sharpton and one of the greatest pulpiteers in the history of the English language. He had a book, I don't know if you're familiar with it, called God in the Ghetto. And he coined this phrase, the deep voice, the unholy wedlock. He coined that back in the 70s, and the unholy wedlock he called it, is the wedlock between Americanism and Christianity. He said it's an unholy wedlock that is giving birth to bastard children. That's Henri. And there is an unholy wedlock. And the bastard children of this unholy wedlock is the MAGA nation. Hallelujah. Now, if we was in the Sunday morning, folk would be shouting just about now. One last thing. And that is, thank God for wokeness. Because we need to be informed. We need to know. But this morning, when I woke up, and when you woke up, I didn't stay in bed. So it's not good enough just to be woke, and then after you wake up, lay there in bed and do nothing. So the purpose of being woke is so you can get up and do something. And one of the things that Simmons College is going to do this year, along with Ja'Cory Arthur, who's our council person who will give leadership to this, is that this summer we're going to try to recreate in the city of Louisville, which is one of the most segregated cities in America, Freedom Summer. And to have as we celebrate the 60th anniversary of Freedom Summer, blacks and whites from all over the country, college students, just like Goodman and Swarner and Cheney did, we want to have that. In fact, we want to have, I think it's Swarner's wife to come and have missionaries from all across the country and in our city to converge on West Louisville, to engage in tutorial programs, mobilize the medical community, teachers, and a voter registration campaign like we've never seen take place in the city of Louisville. So thank you so very much for being here. And I do think, is Maddie's Kitchen open? Does anyone? It is. So please come and have lunch with us in our restaurant. And one last thing, and that is we need every person in the city of Louisville who believes in justice to become an honorary alumni of Simmons College. And we have an honorary alumni certificate that looks like a degree that we want you to proudly display in your office. So when people ask, you mean you went to an HBCU? I'm an honorary alumni. All right. And so you'll hear more about that, but I hope that you would consider becoming an honorary alumni. So regardless of who your team is, U of L, UK, Western, Eastern, whoever, when Simmons plays them on at that game, you root for the Falcons. All right? Okay. Thank you so very much. We woke and we're up. All right. Okay. Thank you, Krystal.